Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at auto format, which is really important and very useful. So hopefully by now you've created a program yourself with 3 lines in it or more, however many you like, and we'll use that to talk about formatting. So we've seen that if you have curly brackets like this, an opening and closing curly bracket, that's known as a code block. So we have a code block here, and there's another code block here. Now, when we put one code block inside another, so this code block is inside this code block, and here we have statements within a code block. And when you put code inside a code block, or you put one code block inside another, it's really important to indent it. So you see that all the code within these curly brackets is indented by one tab, and all the code within these curly brackets is indented by another tab. And although that's cosmetic, so the program works without it. Let's try this. It's nevertheless extremely important to get this right, because if you don't have correct formatting in your code, it will be very difficult to read. It will look a mess. So always strive to format your code nicely and pay particular attention to indentation. Make sure that you indent one block of code within another, like this. You might have seen an American TV series called Silicon Valley, and in that, the protagonist is a computer programmer, and at one point he has a girlfriend who's also a computer programmer, and they have an argument and they end up sort of splitting up because they can't agree about whether it's better to use spaces or tabs to do indentation. So to indent some code within a code block, let's take this as an example. You could use 4 spaces. Typically it will be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can also use a tab like this. I just press the tab key there. There are pros and cons to both of these. So it can get annoying to have to keep typing spaces, and even hearing people typing spaces. You know, that can get quite annoying by itself. But spaces tend to have a consistent appearance across different editors. This is probably less important now than it used to be in the past, but I think it's still true that spaces give you better consistency when you write code in one editor and load it into another. On the other hand, they're annoying to type, and that's why I greatly prefer tabs, because just one tab can indent your code. So this will be indented 2 tabs, because it's within 2 code blocks. It's within that and within that. So I recommend using tabs to indent your code, but if you are working with a team of programmers and they were all using spaces, you should use spaces instead, because the worst thing you can do is mix tabs and spaces. That tends to mean that when you load code written in one editor into another editor, it will lose its formatting and it will get out of line. So pick one of these for 4 spaces or a tab to do the indentation and stick to it. Many editors these days will allow you to change spaces into tabs if you want. So I'm sure you can configure that in Eclipse. You can make it change a tab into a space, and also into 4 spaces, sorry. And also Eclipse helps you. So if you type a line, so if I'm at the end of this line here and I hit return, it puts the cursor in the right place so that we don't have to worry too much about indenting. So that's very helpful. Now, here's the most important sort of takeaway message for this video. You can automatically format your code. So let's put maybe a bracket in the wrong place here and put excessive spaces in and maybe indent this too much. If I select app.java, right click it and go to source, and where are we? Source and format, it automatically formats my code for me. It will take out duplicated blank lines, and it will line up brackets and stuff like that. And that's incredibly helpful. Not only because it makes the code a lot easier to read, but also because if you made a mistake there, so if you've maybe missed off a bracket and you try to format it, then it won't format, or the formatting will go a bit strange. And that's really helpful for spotting where you've gone wrong. Let's put that bracket in again. Also, you can see an error down there. There's a red error marker that appears if you've done something wrong. This says insert bracket to complete class body in this particular case. Let's put that back in. Now, you can also format using a keyboard shortcut. And I strongly recommend that you memorize this shortcut and you use it constantly. Some people think that beginners are better off using a text editor that doesn't have auto formatting, and the reasoning is that that forces people to really learn to do the formatting themselves. But in my experience, if beginners use auto format a lot, they gradually become used to the formatting. I think that's the quickest way to learn it. So I'm going to be suggesting that you auto format your code constantly, do it all the time. And the way that we do it, as we've seen, we could right click and go to source format, but it's quicker to use a keyboard shortcut. And on the Mac, that's Command Shift F, and on Windows it's Control Shift F. So here I'm using a Mac, so I'm going to, with one hand, my left hand, I'm going to hold down Command and Shift, and with my right hand I'm going to just press F, and that's formatted my code for me. Let's try that again. So Control Shift F or Command Shift F on the Mac. Great. So it's important to do that all the time. Do it constantly. Try to write code in the first place that's formatted nicely, but also use auto format constantly to check that your formatting is okay. And eventually this will become second nature to you because you'll be doing it all the time. And that really, really helps to make code that's easy to read. And it really, really helps to keep basic errors out of your code. Okay, so until next time, happy coding. Hello, in this video we're going to start looking at variables, and variables are one of the most important basic building blocks of computer programs. So we'll get started with them here. I've created a project called integer variables. I've given it a class called app, which has a main method, and I've put one statement in there. It just says hello. So you should try that for yourself and check that you can run it. And then let's add some more code to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually click after the opening bracket here and hit return a couple of times, just so that I can get a couple of blank lines above this statement and after the opening curly bracket. And here I'm going to type, well, we need a name for our variable and we need to think about what it's actually going to refer to. A variable is it's kind of a way of referring to some sort of value or some sort of entity that can change as your program progresses, and that's why it's called a variable, because it varies. Let's imagine that you keep cats and you've got some quantity of cats in your house. So what we want is a variable that can hold the number of cats we've currently got. Maybe sometimes your friend takes some of them, or you acquire more cats, so the number of cats that you've got can change. Okay, so I'm going to write here int, and then a space, and then cats, and then a semicolon. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, let's deal with this yellow warning. So you see there's yellow underlining here, and in the margin there's a little yellow icon, it's like a light bulb with an exclamation mark in this version of Eclipse. If I hover over it, it says the value of the local variable cats is not used. What it's telling me is that I've created a variable, a thing called a variable, and I'm not using it, and that's true. So warnings are things that you might want to pay attention to in your program. You don't really want to have any warnings in your program when you run it, but unlike an error, a warning won't stop your program actually running. So I can actually run this program still. It does actually run. So if you see a red icon here, or there's red underlining, that's an error. And an error is a problem. It will stop your program compiling. You won't be able to run it. But this is just a warning, so we can run it. Okay, now what have we done here? Well, this is a statement, finishes in a semicolon. And we've essentially said that it's a bit like creating a sort of bucket in this case. It's a bucket big enough to hold numbers, and it's the right type of bucket for holding numbers. If you wanted to hold text or something, we'd need something different. So int is, we call it the type of the variable, and int is a primitive data type, we call it in Java. And cats is just a name I've made up. It's like sticking a label on a bucket and writing cats on it. So we've got our bucket, which can hold numbers because we've used the keyword int, and we've stuck a label on that bucket called and written cats on it. Int is short for integer, and integer just means a whole number. It can be positive or negative, but it's a number. So we can assign a value to that. Let's do this. So I'm going to go to maybe the next line and write cats equals 7, semicolon. What have we done now? Well, we've taken the number 7 and we've stored it in this variable. Or we say that we've assigned the value 7 to this variable. And it's like taking the number 7 and putting it in our bucket. This is going to seem confusing at first, but after you've practiced it a bit, it won't be. And finally, let's output this value. So I've got system.out.println here, and I'm going to get rid of this text, so get rid of the stuff in the speech marks. So it looks like this. And then between these round brackets, I'm going to type cats. So we're saying display the value of this variable. Let's click run, and then it says there in the console, it says 7. So just to go through that again quickly, we wanted a variable that can refer to a number, and we've written int. That's short for integer, because we want to create some space in the computer's memory essentially that can hold a number. And this process here, we call it declaring a variable. And really it's like creating a bucket of the right size and type to hold a number, and then sticking a label on it and writing cats on that label. Here we've assigned a value to the variable, and that's a bit like taking the number 7 and putting it in this bucket. So we say that we've assigned a value to the variable cats, and that value is 7 that we've assigned. And then finally we've printed the value, so that comes out on the console. Try this for yourself. The order matters. You've got to have these in the right order, and check that you can get this to work, and then we'll see what we can do with variables. So until next time, happy coding.